So bodies, they're really fun to do, very fun to draw, but they're not exactly the easiest thing for a beginner to start approaching. So I want to introduce to you how I get started with drawing a human body. And I do it by usually starting out with the basic skeleton, as you can see with this one right here. Typically, this is a male body in general. I like to start with the head, and I measure the rest of the features based on the head, the ribs, and the hips. And so I typically lay down the neck, and then for a male body, we usually have broader shoulders. So we're going to start out with the ribs in sort of this elongated pentagon shape, the shoulders, and we're going to do some quick curved lines right here. We lay the hip about halfway to the entire body, right? Maybe slightly even lower. Then we do our legs, and halfway point is the kneecap. So the quadriceps in comparison to like your shin is about the same size. Obviously there are variations, like say if you have like a more slender kind of character with long limbs, maybe their shins are a little longer than their femurs, right? Just ever so slightly. Don't go too crazy overboard or it's going to start looking weird. Right? Those proportions right here. The hands usually reside breast ends over somewhere around the hip area. Not going to exceed over half of your thigh. And then how do you fill that out, right? Well, let's start out with the front part. So male shoulders are going to be a lot more square. They're going to have more muscles and they're going to slope down like this. I like to emphasize the shoulder muscle, the deltoid, although that's not necessarily going to show on every single male body. And it's only going to show if they're relatively fit enough. If not, it's going to look somewhat smooth, sort of like that. But by adding it, I sort of help distinguish it a little bit better away from a female body. Right, even if I smoothed out the deltoids, it still reads sort of more masculine because of how broad the shoulders are and how high I made the collarbones. The male chest, the male breast are typically higher up. The nipples are going to be further outwards like this. And then their overall body shape is a rectangle. So their hips are not going to be too flayed out. And in the case of a more muscular man, their body shape is going to be more of a triangle, at least for the upper section. So you're going to get this kind of shape if he's more muscular, right? But if we're talking about just the average man, he's going to end up usually typically with a more square rectangular torso. And these two exaggerated hip bones and where your thigh is going to come out of that. The genital region is going to rest about kind of like the bikini area, sort of. Belly button sits a little higher up than in females. And you typically want to make the legs just a little bit more muscular. And the way I like to approach drawing legs, I think of it as cylinders or rounded cylinders. And so I break up the leg in order for it to make more sense, because when you're drawing the muscles, there's this huge muscle right here, your quadriceps, and that's why it creates this sort of ballooned out shape. Your quads are going to be a stretched out kind of twisty candy. And you're going to want to taper it out at least to the ankles. In more stocky characters, this part might be shorter and fatter, and you're going to have less of a taper like that. And that creates this sense of stableness, as those like they can stand for like ages and ages and ages, right? So erase that. As for the back, similar concept of the triangle. the Dorito man, the one shape that you get if you work out a lot, or else it's just going to be a good old rectangle. And we basically lay out, this is your ribcage area, your spine, your hip area, stretches down, and then you flesh everything out based on those. And so being able to draw a skeleton is going to be very helpful for you to draw an actual figure. The overall proportions is the upper torso is about half of the size of the whole body, where maybe the body is just slightly longer if the character is a little more elongated, more elegant looking. Typically, I like to draw the proportions where the torso is a little shorter because it gives the impression that the character is taller. I mean, this is why high-waisted jeans exist, right? Everyone wants long legs. And as for the spine and the side profile view, you have to think about how S-shape is the spine. For males, it's just a slight S shape. It's going to be like that. Whereas for female, it's a lot more S shape. Like that. And that just means that they're carrying a lot more weight in their lower back. And so you have to make sure the character is looking balanced as such. So if she is standing like here, the weight is leaning back this way. So you have to make sure this pelvis is pushed forward slightly in order for it to balance out. And the same goes for the legs. If her hip is pushed back, you gotta make sure that the overall leg is ending up pushing a little forward so everything balances out, right? Female proportions are slightly easier for beginners to grasp because it's softer, there's less complex muscles involved. And so again, I start out with the head, draw the neck, coming down, draw yourself a slight oval pentagon shape for the rib cage. Coming out for it, we're gonna draw the arms really loosely. Do some circles for the hands. Come down. You're gonna estimate that the hip is about, say about a fourth of that whole upper torso, right? It's gonna sit somewhat close to the hands too. And then you're gonna draw some legs, which are about a little bit more than half of this length. Draw your feet, put in your knees, which are about halfway or slightly higher up, but never too low, or else you're gonna get a really stout looking character. And then you learn to fill this out by looking at this one. So her hip's gonna sit higher because for females, their waist is higher up since their hip is bigger. Their hip bones are bigger. And so whereas the male hip waist may reside maybe somewhere down here, right? Real quick. Male hips might reside here, male waist might reside here, but female waists are going to sit higher up. And so we can reduce these shapes almost like a t-shirt, like a crop top, right? And then the hip's going to be wider than for men. You're going to end up with a triangle shape rather than an inverted triangle shape, right, for male. Come down and you're going to realize that because female hips are wider, the inclination of the thighs are going to be a little steeper, more angular. So it's going to be angled out this way more. Whereas men, it might just be straighter down like this, right? And so if we're going to reduce these skeletons further down into more basic shapes, let's do that real quick right now. Let's draw in our heads. Oops. Draw in the heads. we're gonna break up these body parts into shapes, right? Cylinders. If you've ever seen any of those anatomical dolls, wooden dolls, this is how you want to think about when you're drawing them. You're gonna want to try to break up the anatomy into as basic as you can, and then add muscles as you come along and get more familiar with how to draw anatomy. So we draw in the shoulders, the arms, so this is just the basic shapes that you want to think about these body parts as. Obviously, you're not actually going to keep these as is. Let me color coordinate them so you can recognize which parts are which parts. So this is your rib cage, the hips, and then I think one final difference is the shoulders. And so you'll see that the silhouette is different for male and female. Now, if we're actually drawing characters that are moving and acting in realistic situations, you're never going to be posing your characters like these dolls. Like, even if we're looking at like this, I highly doubt anyone really stands such stick straight up, right? It's such an uncomfortable pose that typically, even if you start out standing this straight, most people start tending to lean on one foot or like kneeling down or squatting. And that's where figure gesture drawings will really come in to help you practice how to actually pose a figure, right? So I have prepared a couple of examples for gesture drawings, and we're going to go through them really quickly to practice like the act of gesture drawing. And gesture drawing, the whole idea is that you do it really quickly. You're trying to just capture the overall gesture or overall flow of the spine. And so you're not too concerned with all the anatomy or capturing every single little detail. And it'll really help build you the foundation in order to be able to say, I want to draw a character who's squatting, or I want to draw a character who's lying arched back, right? Then it'll become more natural for you to visualize these in a more 3D form. Let's start out with this one first. And so with gesture drawings, what you're going to do is you're going to go real quick, right? Your goal isn't to sketch all the skeleton muscles, but to capture general vibe of the figure's poses. And so I'm trying to capture that right here, right now. And you can do this with traditional medium or with digital, but the whole idea is you want to be looking at the overall silhouette and the angles of the body rather than, say, the various details, right? And so I'm noting that her shoulders are tilted like this, so I gotta capture it when I do my little gestures. her head. We're gonna ignore the hair for now because that's not the important part. And we're gonna erase away to capture some of that light back in here. Right, it's not perfect, especially since this is digital, and digital tends to be a little bit different when it comes to doing gesture drawings. All right, and then that's time for this one. Shrink this down. So that's number 1. Number 2. Again, let me switch over to a more sketchy like brush. Yeah, number 93 is a little better. All right, again, we're just capturing the overall vibe. I'm gonna use a lighter color so I don't feel too obligated. All right, so we're trying to capture the flow of her arms. And so we're using sweeping strokes, right? And how do we identify how to do the overall body? Well, overall shape of the body is this S shape, right? And so we have to make sure we capture this hip tilt, this shoulder tilt. Right here, see? That overall shape. And so I'm going to delete that. And we're going to try to capture that ourselves. So the shoulder tilt, the hip tilt, or make sure we're capturing that S shape. We're going to push this out, exaggerate it a little bit more. Make sure we're capturing the overall shape. Don't get too distracted by how the legs are formed or how the arms and hands are supposed to look. Right, we gotta capture that leg. Just doing this real quick again. And so you see how I captured the overall shape, but there's not too much detail because I wasn't concerned at all with those. So when you're doing gesture drawings, you're just not gonna be concerned. You're basically going lightly over using a sort of medium shade and then building a sort of silhouette of the figure and then slowly sculpting out maybe say some of the lighter parts that you're seeing and focusing mostly on the overall shape. And then we'll do one more that is this sort of gesture drawing. All right, so how does her overall shape look like? It's gonna be extended backwards like this, and it's gonna be elongated sort of like that, right? And so let us capture that ourselves. Start with the head, put in the arms, use that shoulder as your reference point for arching that spine. See that arm stretching back. And this is also a forced perspective kind of way, so doing this, thinking about the body in a silhouette format will really help you identify how do you foreshorten the body. You see, I got the general shape of the breast, the shape of the spine, and I didn't even do too much work for it, right? And through this practice, I now know how the general shape of a arched back will feel like, how the general shape of stretching out the arm may feel like, right? Now we're going to take a little more time to draw these out a little bit better. So with this one, again, we're going to give ourselves, actually we're going to do one more version of a gesture sketch, and it might be something a little different than what we've done now. It's a little more loose and goosey, and it tends to help you feel out the overall shape of the figure rather than being concerned too much about the light and dark. So another version of figure sketching might look something like this, right? Where you're doing lines that capture the spine. You see the leg and you're like, okay, I want to capture that leg. It's sort of bending like this. And you're not necessarily worried too much about filling out that form. Right, and we captured a person sitting on a chair, just like that. A lot more loosey-goosey. But the important part is we got the feel of how to use relatively curvy lines, especially for female bodies, rather than like very stiff, oh, I gotta do it like this, right? No, you gotta loosen up that wrist. Now, I'm gonna use this same photo and then move on to a more refined figure sketching, where maybe you might see one continuous line, and so I'm gonna first capture that arch of the back, put her head in, And using one continuous line, I put in her arm, put in that leg. You're gonna see some residuals of me moving that brush back and forth without lifting up. Laggy a little bit. It works better if you don't have multiple programs learning like me, and you can move a lot faster. Because the goal of gesture sketching is to loosen up your hand and help you get used to actually sketching, right? So you're going to try to do continuous, try to limit the amount of times you're lifting up your pen or pencil, right? And obviously she has that blanket, but who cares, right? And so this is another form of gesture sketching that you can take. You can loosen up your wrist by placing your pencil or pen down and trying to draw the whole thing without lifting up your pencil too often. And it'll help you get a feel for like the overall gesture. And once your wrist is all warmed up, you might want to move into some more cleaner looking sketches, right? Let me move this baby over. Goodbye. Say cha-cha over here or something. Move this baby over here. And so with this figure, okay, we're going to start out with the skull. Put in her hand. Draw on the skeleton of her shoulder. Figure out whether or not there's a tilt in her shoulder. And it seems like she has a slight tilt. Put in her other hand and note how her back arches. Put in that calf, right? That major muscle. Put in her thigh, another major muscle, reference point. And you're going to see her foot arches like crazy, but it's relatively straight all the way through. So you got to make sure that it follows the line from her shin. And we're going to measure that her other thigh comes out just a bit around her shin, pops out the knee around the ankle region. And I just want to say these images that I've been using have been found on the Quick Pose page site that I talked about in the first video, I believe. And so when you want to have some different types of reference images besides the ones I'm showing here, or the ones I'll be providing you in the class exercise, you can just go to that site real quick, pop it in, get you some really interesting poses. You can choose whether or not you want clothes. Challenge yourself by drawing fabrics. And you see here I'm adjusting her knee because I realized it was a tad too low because she is actually raising her leg slightly. And so that's the general shape. I'm not too concerned with getting the hair in there because this is not the purpose. We're trying to work somewhat faster and looser. And then this person is dancing. And so you're going to get these long, elongated lines, right? The spine is tilting. It's twisting. Here's her spine. Her torso is sort of acting like this with her hip opening up. her hip opening up this way, whereas her torso is twisting that way, right? Sort of like a candy wrapper. So you're gonna get this sort of openness, and where you're gonna see the pubic area and then opens up into the hip, the thighs, and then her other leg popping out, right? So move that out of the way. We gotta capture that. So real quick, gotta give myself more space than this. Make sure when you're doing this, using separate layers, giving yourself more space than what I'm doing, because I am quite lazy and I'm trying to fit everything so you can see, compare all of them at once, right? And if you're not sure about how to capture that line shape, go back to our initial blocking it in and then carving it out. It's very helpful. Alright, gotta give myself more space or else I'm not gonna be able to capture that beautiful twist in her back. Okay, so now I have enough space. Her head is leaning backwards to compensate for the weight that she threw forward like this. And so I twisted it, her hips, throwing out that leg, making sure it's not too crazy long. And don't be too worried about the hands because that's not our main concern right now. They can be as messy, they could be a little ball right now, just as like a placeholder. And we're gonna notice that her shoulder is pushing out in front, at least for this part, for this side of her shoulder. The other shoulder is gonna be pushing backwards. And you're gonna get this sort of triangle view of her back twisting just like that. And then because her leg is thrown so far back, her buttocks muscles are being pushed upwards. So we gotta meet that. And you're gonna try to capture that overall shape in the front, even though she has her breast there. It's gonna be a continuous line all the way to her leg. And she's on tiptoe and her leg extends all the way, same continuous angle until her toes. And then on this side, again, same angle until it reaches her toes. You can see the shoddiest hand ever, but our main interest was indeed getting that back twist. So who even cares, right? You can probably mute this part out. You can see me reduce the shape of her leg to this sort of cylinder chicken leg kind of thing. Because the important part is capturing general shape and flow rather than the importance of every single muscle. Right, so there's the overall shape. And last but not least, another athlete in motion, right? We're gonna capture her outstretched hands and her legs. So her arm is poking out in front of us right here with her hands. Right here, I'm capturing the other side of her hand real roughly, seeing how they measure apart. We gotta make sure there's that angle to showcase like this hand is in front, whereas that one is further back, right? I drew her butt in, so I have a reference point for where to draw her knee. Her knee's sitting straight there. Her other leg's gonna be poking out in a beautiful pointed toe. And reference point, you see that it lines up just with that other hand, so we gotta make sure, keep that accurate. You're just going to flesh these out, right? Again, we're not too worried about being super accurate. We're trying to get the flow of the shapes. If her shoulder's here, that means her other shoulder has to be down here. And then her breasts are right here. And so that's like general shape of the figure. I wasn't too exact with it because those types of drawings I'll do with the final example where I demonstrate how you might apply these types of reference photos into your own work. I will do one more example of a gesture drawing with a man because I feel like with males it's a little more difficult because they tend to have a little bit more muscle, so you're focused on the muscle rather than say the overall shape. So I want to show you how you can avoid doing that kind of issue. So hide that baby. Alright, let's choose that guy. I love the way his arms are kind of bent in on itself and overlapping over the knees, and I think that could be very interesting for knowing how to draw, especially since his muscles are all so in focus. And so again, we're going to start out with the head, give ourselves a reference point, not too worried about the face, put in the hands, just a sort of boxing glove shape, add in the neck, figure out how shoulders are tilted. This guy's shoulders are slightly tilted upwards like this, whereas his elbows are tilted like this and his knees are super tilted, right? So we're going to communicate those, put in your markers, start out with the arm. The arm, this part is sort of like a triangle shape. There's a hand right here. not too concerned about doing the hand accurately right now. Putting in your little arms and elbows. And we're just gonna focus ourselves on the general shape of the arm, not worrying too much about the muscles yet. We can always go back in with the muscles later. Let's just get that kind of tilt of the arm, that kind of pushing of the arm inwards towards the chest. And so you're going to capture that. It's going to be overlapping over the pectorals. And so once we put in the elbow and the hand, I have to realize that I put the placement of this knee too low, and that's how we adjust it. We push it back up. So now the knee and thigh is touching that arm, right? And we're gonna notice how this tilts this way. So we're gonna have to capture that. So that means I need to push this out this way in order for the length to be appropriate for this type of foreshortening. The knee is right here. Very fluid shape right here. Get his buttocks. He worked very hard to get those muscles. Can't forget them. And with this right here, you're going to see that the knee pops out this way. His foot, his toe, we're just putting the placement. We're not necessarily too concerned about getting it super clear and detailed, but we're making sure that the overall anatomy is correct and that the shape and the overall flow is flowing nicely. I think perhaps his arm needs to be a little bit higher up, so his shoulder has some more breathing room for his neck and everything. And that means his hand needs to move up also. Alright, so since this is the general shape, we're now going to clean things up and add some shadows so it looks more 3D, right? And so what's the first core shadow I'm going to be putting in? The ones at his big old tatas and his neck and his face. Because those are the ones that help define that he has big old muscles that he worked for at the gym and in the kitchen. Good Lord. Pop out his biceps. His deltoid, you can see. And with shading, you can fix some of those proportions, right? Edgiest guy you'll ever meet. Sit in the shadow with his head down like this and his arm covering his face. Capture that core shadow that comes from being in the dark. And since his deltoids are so pronounced, he's got that cute little divot right here between his collarbone and his shoulder. putting that core shadow in for his leg. You can see that there's definitely going to be bounce light everywhere because this part of the knee right here, you see, caught some of that lightness. There's this really strong shadow right here. And then it's contrasted by this light right here. So I'm going to erase that away. Darkness of his knees right here. Right there. You got the general shadows and it'll help you define some of those muscles. And you saw it when I was drawing initially. I drew all those arms and legs in really smooth, kind of cylindrical kind of cones and cylinders rather than drawing out each individual muscle. And you really only start drawing individual muscles when you're super comfortable with like basic forms, like you're able to pose your characters in any way. And I will show you one last final example in which I transform this pose using my own characters, right? So let us bring back Leah and Leo. So we're gonna capture the general shape of this pose first. His shoulders are right here, popping out. His shoulders back here again. His hips, his torso. I can simplify it into this rib cage t-shirt kind of shape. Get you your knee, pop it out. So we're gonna imagine this character right here is Leo and this character right here is Leah, right? And Leah's gonna be flying out this way, facing us. Basically, I'm treating her legs sort of like gelatin puppet legs. In doing so, I'm capturing the overall flow rather than worrying too much about the anatomy, because when you're in motion, anatomy can be distorted just oh so slightly. Alright, now we step back, look at it from far away. Does it really quite capture that flow? I feel like Leia's pose could be a little bit better. Like that. And we're going to rotate it, try to see it from a different perspective, see we're capturing it all right. I think we're doing okay. Lower the opacity, and now we're going to try blocking out those basic shapes. And for shortened, we got the basic skeletal structure. But now we gotta actually fill out the form. And so that's the overall form. I'm gonna shrink this down so it fits a little bit better on the composition, so it's not crazy touching the edge. And now we're gonna hide that underneath and finally actually fill in the features for Leah and Leo. All right, Now I'm going to reduce the opacity of this and do some drawing. All right, and then we got our finished kind of using that reference photo and we replaced it with our favorite characters. And so just basically when you're doing reference photos, try not to make it too similar to the obviously to the reference photo, but for the sake of this lesson, I try to keep it sort of similar so it's not too hard to track, but obviously you can always alter whether you want the hands open or closed, whether you want a character in this particular position, or maybe you don't like the way the angle works. And so in the next video, I will finally be teaching you how to turn these substitutions that I've made, like this blob here and like this right here, into actual hands and feet. So buckle your seatbelts, ladies and gents. We are about to embark on one of the hardest journeys you will ever have in your artistic journey, drawing hands. Later.